So we're going to be talking about plucking the pearls from previous years. And we've been doing this conference for 18 years. 18 years. Some of you have been in this room for 18 years. Raise your hand if you've been here for 18 years. Hello, God bless you. Some of you are new. And rather than just moving forward, I wanted us to take a moment and pause and integrate some of the amazing speakers that we've had over the years. Every month in my work, I find myself using things I've learned from other speakers in the conference, and I wanted to share them with you. And of course, there are far too many to choose from. But the pearls we'll be discussing stood out to me as some of the most profound takeaways that I gained, influencing my personal practice, and that have helped me navigate the 3 key questions we'll be discussing today. So today, we will cover how we can rethink threat assessments to create a culture of safety in schools. And as you all know who may have heard me talk about threat assessments, I prefer to call them safety assessments. How can we create a sense of calm and security in our students? And how to identify barriers to learning that impact students' emotional well-being. So let's start with the first question. How can we rethink threat assessments and create a culture of safety in schools? So important right now. And this is a question that Sarah Goodrum, a brilliant sociologist, has taught us about in a previous year when we both gave a lecture about safety assessments. That was in 2022. So I want to for a moment, I want to distinguish for you the difference between culture and climate, which, quite frankly, was always a little murky for me. So culture, as Goodrum explains, refers to the way teachers and other staff members work together along with their shared norms, values, and assumptions. And the way I'd like to think about it is it's the choreography of the characters in response to something. It's basically how staff operate and work together. Climate refers to the feelings and attitudes that are elicited by a group, organization, or environment, different from what we'll be hearing about climate change in the next speech. But I think the way we think about school climate, it's the vibe in the school. It's the moment when you walk into school and you have a sense of how it makes you feel when you walk into the building. Now, let me tell you about Sarah Goodrum's work. I read her article, which was a case of a study of a threat assessment that was done, a failed one, a failed threat assessment that was deadly. A student came back 3 months after the failed threat assessment and killed himself and another student. As part of the settlement, Sarah, who's a sociologist, did an in-depth interview of this case. 8,000 pages of interviews. And what was informative and transformative to me about doing threat assessments is usually when we talk about threat assessments, we usually emphasize the individual. If you think about schoolta.com, Dewey Cornell's work, God bless him, he manualized the FBI and the Department of Education threat assessments, but we always are focusing on the individual questions that we ask the student. What she did was increase the lens. What she wanted to do was to emphasize that there are multiple missed opportunities. When we hear so many times we hear about a school shooting, we hear, oh, yes, there was multiple opportunities, but we missed it. What was going on in the school culture that allowed it to be missed? It's not blaming the victim, but it's telling us that we need to strengthen our school climate, especially in these times. And she talked about 5 characteristics of a culture of safety. One was staff should be informed about the current knowledge in the field. 2, leaders should promote the reporting of concerns, problems, mistakes, and near misses. And 3, something I so wish we were happening right now in our country, leaders should build an atmosphere of trust in which people are encouraged to report safety-related concerns. And 4th is the idea that staff should remain flexible in adapting to changing demands. And the 5th was staff should be willing to learn and adjust the functioning of the safety systems, basically having a feedback loop. So another wonderful speaker, Robert Evan, he spoke a long time ago, back in 2005, but he wrote a book called The Human Side of School Change: Reform, Resistance, and the Real-Life Problems of Innovation. So why are you looking at this gold plunger? Because he talks about a principal who really encouraged sharing mistakes. And he had a Golden Plunger Award that was given out at staff meetings when people were willing to share the mistakes they made. And that really has, to me, a profound impact when we think about when we supervise our mentees, because we really do want to create a culture of safety. If you think about the best supervision experiences you have, at least for me, the best supervision experiences I've had is when I'm willing to show my underbelly. I trust someone enough to say, this is when I made a mistake. And I make them. So this is one of the things I also love about our conference. I have a running list of books that I hear recommended by speakers. And I'm shifting now to talk about students and culture. So Rachel Polliner, she spoke back in like 4 years ago, and she recommended this book, Better Than Carrots or Sticks. And I've always struggled a little bit trying to understand, get a really clear, coherent definition of retributive justice versus restorative justice. And I really like this description. Retributive justice is about what rule was broken, who broke it, and what is the punishment for breaking that rule. Restorative justice is looking at what harm was done, what actions would repair that harm, and who is responsible for that repair. So when a student has made a threat in school, preserving a culture of safety is never more important than in those moments, especially when you're transitioning a student back into the school or back into the classroom. If you look at school shootings, often, or aggressive incidences, they often happen in those transitions. So, how to repair a damaged relationship. I was giving a talk at a residential school on trauma, and I referenced the book and the definition of restorative justice, and an educator shared this incredible story, which actually moved my understanding of when we can introduce restorative justice. So a kindergartner at the residential school who had been kicked out of the last 3 schools. When the teacher was going to put away the puzzles, frustrated that she hadn't finished her puzzle, she tried to strangle the teacher. She was separated, and one adult talked with the kindergartner, and another administrator talked to the class. And what the class said is, we want our teacher to be safe. And what the child said was, I'm not going to have any friends. And then they brought the two groups together in the classroom, and that allowed the group of kids to say they would be her friend, but they needed to be sure the teacher was safe. And from that small intervention, which was really about repair, the child didn't have another outburst for 4 months. Another tip that came from Rachel Polliner in this book, Better Than Carrots or Sticks, was about the helping curriculum. So I think building on a culture of safety is about helping each other. And I don't know about you, but I'm someone who struggles sometimes when I'm feeling most vulnerable to ask for help. And many of our students, when they're struggling, sometimes they'd say, I'd rather be bad than stupid. Or if they have trauma, they may fiercely protect themselves from being vulnerable because they're afraid of being hurt. And I think we need to be explicit about the helping curriculum. And this is what they talked about. Did you ask for help today when you needed it? Did you offer help to another when you recognized that they needed it? And most importantly, did you accept help when it was offered to you? And I just had a patient where thinking about this, thinking about how they allowed themselves to be helped was so helpful. He felt inordinate shame at being vulnerable and needing to ask for help. And some of our discussion was focusing on him practicing it with me and then being able to generalize it to other settings. And Wes Woodson said, you are not weak for getting help, you are stronger because of it. And we also certainly heard with Ivy her talking about that over and over again, about the strength it takes to recognizing you need help. So how can we create a sense of calm and security in our students? So it's essential that educators know how to self-regulate when working with a provocative student. What we know sometimes with traumatized kids is they provoke and then provoke to control. So when I say about self-regulating, we want to be aware of what activates us and what sensations in our body that happen when we're being activated. And finding a sturdy center. And one of the speakers that spoke in 2015, he's a psychologist. Most of his work has been done on attachment work, and his name is Dan Hughes. You all might remember him. And he also wrote a book for schools around attachment. And he shared an acronym that I have used over and over with educators and parents. And again, we heard some of it when Ivy was speaking, and it's called PACE. I mean, don't we all love acronyms, especially if you can remember them? So, Playful. Playful is the idea that if you don't shame a student or a child, that if you can stay playful in the moment, laugh together, it actually releases oxytocin, it lowers your cortisol, which is your stress hormone, and it can change the moment. And then pause. Pause is what we heard about with Ivy, that you go and you put your kid maybe on a TV for a moment, You go into the bathroom, you get a chance to bring your system down. Acceptance is one that sometimes educators will struggle with. What we're saying is, you don't accept the behavior, but you accept the feelings. You don't argue with a kid who is dysregulated. You let them tell you how they feel, and then you join to redirect. Curious is obvious. You ask, I'm wondering if sometimes you might even make the effort to say what you think's happening, even if they're going to yell at you that you got it all wrong. And empathy is giving them the felt experience of being heard. And I was surprised by this, but I've been getting supervision over the last 5 years because of the introduction of Zoom. It takes 20 seconds to get new neuronal paths. So what that means is when you're tuning in and letting someone know that you're heard, it's actually a time when you really want to slow down. It's a long time. Try it. If you ever do video yourself, you'll see that, at least for me, you can see how fast I move. And it was a real lesson to me about slowing down. So I just want to give you an example of using the pace and being playful. I was doing a threat assessment with a student who was adamant that he wasn't going to do therapy. That was a no-fly zone. And in a moment, and I almost had a fantasy last night when I was up at 3 doing my speech in my head of actually doing push-ups for you, but I challenged him to a push-up contest. So you can imagine, he's 12, I'm, at the time, was probably about 50. But magically, somehow I beat him. Do you know what happened? I'm not competitive. I'm looking at Dr. Jenkins. I'm going to challenge you at the end of this talk. Anyway, but he ended up being in counseling for 2 years, that playful moment. So give it a try. So this is Tina Bryson's work. Tina talked to us during the pandemic. And it's interesting to me, we see these different things that come up, right? There's play, there's playfulness, predictability. We've heard lots of speakers repeat those things. We heard it with Sarah yesterday talking about that. Nonverbal cues, the fact that 80% of our communication comes from nonverbal. But what I want to draw your attention to is when she talked about safety versus threat messaging. And she was speaking during the pandemic. I don't remember, some of you were here. It was when we were virtual, all virtual. And, oh, someone's nodding their head. Thank you. You are a sunflower for me. And she said fear messaging might be, if you don't wash your hands, you could die. And she would say, wait, did I say that was that's the fear, that's the threat messaging. And then the safety message would be, let's wash our hands so we can be safer. I've been thinking a lot about this in the context of things that are happening right now and how we provide safety messages and what we can do right now in the school to communicate safety instead of fear. It's an incredibly challenging time right now for all of us. And I don't have an easy answer. I wish I did. But it's something I've been mulling over. And I thought Professor Kim offered us some language yesterday, and when she talked about students who, in their fear of deportation, came in to the office, and I heard from one of the participants here how that's, whether it's about being afraid of being deported or a transgender student who might be feeling under siege. And what I loved that she said is knowing our limitations. And yet, what she said is something that I'm going to carry back. She said, in this space between me and you, you are being seen, I'm giving you unconditional support. And that what she found comfort in that is that she was fueling them to go back into what are very uncertain times. So I challenge you to consider one conversation you can have to increase the sense of safety in your school or with students. So I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the physiology of safety, which is a felt experience. And you may have heard of these terms. Hyperarousal is when you don't feel safe in your body. You might have emotional reactivity, hypervigilance, intrusive imagery, disorganized cognitive processing. The window of tolerance is optimal arousal. And that's a time you want to have a conversation. You don't want to have a conversation with your son when they come home drunk. It's better to wait for that window of tolerance. And hypoarousal is when you're on shutdown. And I think it's helpful. Some people actually put this chart in their office, and they refer to it when they're working with patients. And it's helpful, I think, to remind teachers and parents where a kid is when they're going to have a conversation. How many of us can remember when you have an escalated student and an administrator might be asking them, why did you do that? Right? Why did you do that? Okay. So Deb Dana spoke last year. So all of you who are first-time participants, you're getting like a cheat sheet. Raise your hand if you're a first-time participant. Hello. This is like a I don't know, bumper sticker of the last 10 years. Pardon? Oh, thank you. I love that. She said she's lucky. Okay, so the autonomic ladder. This was Deb Dana. She spoke last year. She talked about the polyvagal theory of safety. Now, I don't know about you all, but I find anytime when you say poly, I get afraid of what the word's next. So I am going to walk you through what is the polyvagal theory of safety, because I think it's actually really important, especially in these times. It's really about befriending your nervous system. So the way that it works is the ventral vagal is the most sophisticated part of your brain. It's the part where your prefrontal cortex is. It's the part where you feel social, engaged, connected. We heard Sarah had used some terms about that, about being in that place. That's the optimum place to learn. So the vagus nerve, too, I forgot to tell you all, that goes from your brain down to your colon, which is the bottom part of your body. And it's a wandering nerve. So the ventral vagal part is actually from your brain to your diaphragm. And then you have the sympathetic survival, which I really loved when Leibowitz talked with us about yesterday, about the fight or flight, that we so often forget about the fight with anxious kids, but to remember that piece. And that's when you're ready for action. And then you have the dorsal vagal survival, which is about survival, which is syncing with that hypoarousal state. That's when you have a kid that's on shutdown, immobilized, and collapsed. And I think it's really important to remember that what we want is a flexibility in our system. We want to be able to, we are not in this day and age that we are in right now going to be able to stay all the time in ventral vagal. But we want a flexibility. And one of the ways that we have flexibility that I love that Deb Dana talked about is really being able to call up safe spaces for ourselves. And that's something that I've done with my patients, where I have them create images of where they felt safe. So I'm shifting a little bit of gears now, but I want to talk about how can we support students in managing stressful racial encounters in and out of school. So I've already been talking about building stress tolerance and being mindful about students' sense of safety. But I also think this is really urgent right now. So Howard Stevenson spoke to us in 2022. He blew me away. He is a remarkable thinker, and he talked about promoting racial literacy in schools. And his ideas about how to navigate racial conflict, both as a family member and as an educator, to me are so powerful. One thing that stayed with me is he runs an organization called The Lion's Story. And the name is based on the idea, so relevant right now, that the lion's story will never be told as long as this hunter is the one telling the stories. And he highlighted his research in 2009 about what creates the feeling of being connected in school, particularly for Black students. And he talks about how its membership in a school, the predictor, is the frequency of racial discrimination they experienced outside of school, the less belonging they felt in school. So we really need to give support around their experiences, both in school and outside of school, as a way of supporting both mental health and academic progress. And he shared 4 tenets that I just want to remind us of today. He said, the first thing you want to do is provide affection, affirm each of our humanity. The second is our duty to protect from harm. And 3 is correction, to redirect any self-destructive thinking, what Ivy, you talked about, internalized stereotyping, that is critical, and then reinforcing connection. And he talks about racial literacy skills, reading the room, the ability to read racially stressful interactions and combat harmful stereotypes. And the other term I love that he used was about recasting, figuring out comeback statements, journaling, as you talked about, doing dress rehearsals about different ways to respond, and then resolving, figuring out coping strategies, relaxation, and self-regulation during microaggressions, so that in the moment you are aware of the biological impact of the racist confrontation, and you get yourself back into a wise mind. So I would really encourage us to bring Howard Stevenson's wisdom into how we fortify our students. So, and I also love the way it kind of interlaces. It's saying, yeah, Deb Dana's idea of the autonomic ladder is really important, but we have to put it within context, and that may help our students staying engaged. So again, I'm switching gears, and I want to look at how do you identify barriers to learning that impacts a student's emotional well-being? And I'm going to be talking about one student who had processing speed difficulties. I'm going to be drawing on different presenters, but you know how when I started, I said, listen, this has impacted, this conference impacts how I practice with my students. So I wanted to share 2 cases. One is a student with processing speed difficulties and executive functioning problems, and another who had perfectionism. And I think I'm spending time on this question also because Richard Madison was a beloved colleague of mine. He was a child psychiatrist, and he did research, which is, again, obvious, but fortified me, which said that if you don't address the underlying learning disorders, you're going to see behavioral dysregulation. So Ellen Broughton was a psychologist who spoke with us in 2021 and 2022. And she brings a lot of wisdom about students with processing difficulties and how we can respond in ways that help them learn better and not be as frustrated. And she's written 2 books, and I like the title, so I'm going to tell you about them. Bright Kids Who Can't Keep Up and Bright Kids Who Couldn't Care Less. So the way she describes processing difficulties is really interesting to me, and I know several of us are school psychologists, and you're like, why am I explaining that? But I am. Just think of it as review. But I liked it. She said basically it's how quickly you can get stuff done. It's about automaticity, fluidity, and that processing is difficult. So she described executive functioning as the car, and processing is the engine. And I love also the way she talks about family members. What she says is sometimes we may have family members that have different processing speeds. Quite frankly, sometimes we have therapists and students that have different processing speeds. I became a much better therapist for my slow processing students when we were doing Zoom, because there was a little bit of a lag time. And it's just interesting for us to think about that. And she talked about there are important things to think about. First is that you may want to change the definition of success, and you want to create a environment that maximizes the ability for a person to focus. You want to decrease busy work, and you want to, most importantly, give them an opportunity to practice the skill. So I didn't know if Leibowitz realized yesterday when he was talking about the individual ed plan that he was talking about for an anxious kid. I wondered if that anxious kid had processing speed difficulty, because what he embedded in it was, let's not accommodate and not ask that student questions anymore. Let's actually forewarn the child that we're going to be calling on them, and then pause after we ask the question and let the student know that's what we're doing. And I also liked the reminder to us of the 3 things that we want to be arming our students with that Ellen Broughton talked about. She talked about advocating. And I think every student should have a learning passport where they're able to explain to teachers how they learn best, that they're able to both accommodate when they need to be accommodated and sometimes accept the limitations, but to also push themselves. And then I want to just tag in Sarah Ward. We're going to get back to my clinical case. But Sarah Ward, she's spoken at this conference 3 times, 2016, 2020, and 2023. I would encourage all of you to look at her YouTube. She's so fun. And she's really explicit about how often kids with learning disorders go into paralysis. And I love some of the things she talks about, like when we have children with executive functioning difficulties, we end up badgering them. And instead of setting them up for success and teaching them the skills. And she has an acronym called STOP. I like it. It's a way of arming kids to figure out how they need to be in a space when they have executive functioning difficulties. It talks about space and being able to read the room. It talks about having a sense of a timeline, which is totally sucks, as we heard with Roberto, showing us that picture of how he has to be very, very intentional about time because time gets away. It talks about helping with the objects and organizing the objects, and then reading the person, having, especially with younger kids, giving them a role and being able to read the room. Now I'm going to put the 2 together of Sarah Ward's work with executive functioning and Ellen Broughton's work. And what Ellen Broughton has talked about was really identifying the strengths in a student. So I want to tell you about a student I had, and she, in high school, was incredibly overwhelmed. She avoided most things. She had flunked math. She'd been suicidal, and she had gotten no special ed services. We know sometimes there is a tyranny of qualifying for special ed services. And she came to me as a freshman in college. She was apathetic, she was suicidal, and she was avoiding because of the feeling of failure. And we identified that some of this was her executive functioning challenges and her slow processing speed, And by addressing that, we might significantly improve her health. And we talked a lot about the explicit support that she needed, her low self-esteem, and how she could streamline some of her learning. And we began to highlight her strengths. We helped her get organized so that she could consistently take her medication, all the way down to where she put the pills and what to do to remember it. And we ended up having her keep both her pills at home and at work. And I think what Sarah's work had really taught me was how to get in there around the executive functioning challenges and really get into the nitty-gritty, the practicality of it. And we focused on her strengths. She's graduated from college at this point, and we worked through the process of having a job. And she's so good at art. Let me show you her artwork. She has given me permission to share all of this. So on the left are her two artworks that she made. And then on the right is Claudius. And Claudius is an eagle where she got a job. And where she got a job in a small company that does restoration of broken things that are meaningful to people. So if you look on the right, you can't see it, but it was a broken eagle beak. It's now been fixed. And where it went to her strengths is it's a meticulous, slow, repetitive process that allows her to access her artistic skills. So just leaving you with these questions that Ellen Bratton asked is, how do we build on strengths? How do we help children set goals? What are the things that children love to do? What are their aptitudes, their pleasures? How do we instill a growth mindset? How do we support them from a young age, from the 3-year-old baby that you have at home, Ivy? How do we get them to talk about what drives them, what lights them up? And if they choose not to go to college, how can they continue to learn, grow, and make meaning? So building on strengths, I can say though, can be slippery. And it leads me into our next topic, perfectionism. And Miriam's in the front here. If you have wanted me to go, I feel kind of shy, Miriam, recapping your talk, but you all can ask her to elaborate on it more. All right, perfectionism. She gave a lecture in 2023, 2024, and what she helped me to think about are, what are the initial questions that you might ask a perfectionist? What are some tests that are useful? And then what are some interventions? And one thing I would say about these scales, which are in your handout, is with a perfectionist, if you make them out, they may end up really wondering if they can feel the need to get the perfect answer. So you actually want to do it with them. That really helps. Otherwise, you might get some cloudy data. And then what she helped me about was thinking about how to think about the range of perfectionist behaviors. And there were 3 different styles: overdoing, stuck, and avoiding. And I realized a student I was seeing was debilitated by perfectionism. And he would do constant checking, need reassurance, and be incredibly indecisive. And that's the yellow bar there. And he would go into complete avoidance. And I actually shared with him the model that she showed, which was the cycle of avoidance, where you have automatic negative thoughts. Then your habenula, which is in your thalamus, goes overactive. It's the part of your brain that starts to be overstimulated and then goes into shutdown. And then how you go into avoidance behaviors. I'm not giving you total justice, but it's 10 minutes. And then she helped me around perfectionist standards and healthy high standards. And just want to draw your attention to 2 of them. If you tell someone you don't understand something after they've explained it to you, they'll think you're stupid. And a healthy high standard is, my job as a student is to ask questions and let the teachers know if they need to do a better job explaining something to me. And I love this other one: if I can't see the road to success, I won't start working towards it. and she worked about a healthy high standard is success is sometimes a winding road. The path forward will appear as I go. So I put those in your handouts and you can look at them later. So with my patient, in his own words that he allowed me to share, he described he had struggled with medical issues, become overwhelmed, and instead of seeking support, he doubled down, telling himself he needed to be more perfect to keep up with past academic mistakes. He didn't realize he had climbed into, and I love this, the accelerating treadmill of perfectionism. Finally, he couldn't finish his thesis for almost 5 years, and he pressed the pause button. We came together, we addressed his OCD, his ADD, and he was focused on the triggers that had led him astray and came up with reasonable expectations. And these are his words: I was able to create a thesis I was proud of. And when he submitted his applications to grad school, I brought him this t-shirt, which has one of the healthy high standards that he and I had talked about, which is who dares wins. This is from Charlie Barrett. I'm going to invite you to read it from the slide because I have a very important person that I want to make sure we have time to hear from. But it's also talking about our own perfectionism and addresses it. And Charlie Barrett said you can always get this and hang it in your off his website and hang it in your room if you need a reminder about the idea that enough is enough and I am enough. So looping back to Deb Dana, she talks about the glimmers. And the glimmers are a spark of ventral energy. Glimmers are all around us. How many of you noticed that amaryllis on the table there? Raise your hand. Okay, that's something I brought from my house as a glimmer to you all. Sometimes glimmers go unnoticed. Sometimes they can significantly shape our systems. And it's a reminder, glimmers, that we can hold both dysregulation and regulation. It's the DBT thing of both and. And these are a couple of glimmers. This is Millie, that's Liz Jorgensen's dog. This is a good news movement. And how do you know you've encountered a glimmer? One way is it can either be predictable or unexpected. You can see, stop, and appreciate, track, and share. And I like what Deb talks about. Write a glimmer intention. Tell yourself tomorrow you're going to notice 2 things that make you feel like glimmering, and have your student do that. So I'm with my grandson, who I absolutely adore. He's like the cutest 2.5-year-old. We're so blessed to have those little ones as grandchildren, I have to say. And I'm thinking about this talk. I've thought about Deb Dana. I'm in the playground, and look what I saw. This light on a school. And Jeff Perotti, who's here, who's spoken at our conference before, and God bless you, Jeff, I would have put you in here too. But he gave me a quote. He reminded me when I told him this about Dr. Martin Luther King and his famous sermon of love your enemies. He preached, returning hate for hate multiplies hate, adding deeper darkness to night already devoid of stars. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. So I'm going to show you, I'm going to share with you a poem that has really uplifted me. It's by Lucille Clifton. It's Won't You Celebrate With Me? And I really felt like we should hear it in her own words. And to me, this is a great example of recasting and honoring our narrative and being relentless for looking for the light. And then I'm going to introduce my student, Justin.
Won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life? I had no model. Born in Babylon, both non-white and woman, what did I see to be except myself? I made it up here on this bridge between starshine and clay, my one hand holding tight my other hand. Come, celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed.
So what this poem means to me is in the midst of pain is the durability of our human nature. Every year, I teach a Harvard freshman seminar on psychiatry and memoirs, and every year, I get to learn from a stellar group of young people. 2 of them are here today. And what I try to instill in them is the belief that we are all connected. Whether we're a patient or a doctor, we're all experiencing suffering, and we all have the capacity to heal. So, Justin, you're a stunning example of that. I want you to hear a piece he wrote in my class as part of a final project, and in the spirit of the "Won't You Celebrate With Me" I just shared. I want to celebrate the resilience and vulnerability, which I believe is what we all are striving to do as educators as we love our students. So please come up.
Hi everyone, my name is Justin and I was in Dr. Rappaport's freshman seminar this last semester, and it was a really beautiful experience getting to hear everyone's stories, and I hope I can share mine today through a short poem called Caught Red-Handed. Help! SOS! Ring the alarms, fire the gun. Do something, anything. Just come save me. From what, you may ask? I'm not exactly sure. Before you call me crazy, at least hear me out. It has no face for me to describe to you, but the feeling, I'll never forget that feeling. The feeling of the walls around me caving in on itself, like someone is standing on my chest with combat boots, tap dancing on my fragile little body, forcing my heart to race across a finish line that doesn't exist. The feeling of suffocating in a room filled with nothing but my own breath. The weight of invisible hands pulling me deeper and deeper into myself, tugging at my mind, fraying the edges of my thoughts, until nothing feels real but the tightening grip of panic. That feeling that maybe, just maybe, this is all I'll ever be. A never-ending cycle of rushing and falling. Actually, you're right. I'm overreacting. I don't need help. I can solve this one on my own. I can save myself. I've always had this tendency to place the broken in my palms and pray the pieces won't pierce through my fingers. But the shards are sharp, and they slip my skin. Except this time, it's me who's the patient. It is me who is broken. This time, I am too weak to bandage my own wounds. I have allowed myself to be hurt more times than I'm willing to admit. You want proof? Just look at my hands. My fingers angrily stare back at me. The surrounding skin painted bright red, a searing reminder of what I can't escape. The red spreads like an accusation, the truth I can no longer ignore. And yet, I still reach. With trembling hands, I grasp at the air, hoping that someone, anyone, will see the blood and not the mess, will hear the cracks and not the silence. But there's no one to save me. There's no alarms, no cavalry, no outstretched hand. It's just me. So I sit here, restless and unsure, asking one last time, a plea muffled by the weight I carry. Help. SOS. Ring the alarms, fire the gun. Do something, anything. Just come save me.